The Lantern of Lomere. Prologue. The river that hums at night, in the heart of Lomere, where the fields lie like folded quilts, and the hedgerows knit farm to farm, there runs a river that hums at night. The hum is not a song exactly, nor a breeze playing the reeds, but something softer like a lullaby that water tells to stone, and stone remembers for the morning. People say the river has always hummed. Some claim the old abbess blessed it when the abbey bells were still bronze bright. Others say the moon once dipped its silver lip into the current and left a bit of light behind. No one knows for certain. That is Lomere's way. It is a place where mystery is not solved, but lived with. The way a shawl is lived in, comfortably, daily, without fuss. The village itself looks toward the river as a child looks toward a hearth. At dawn, smoke straightens in the chimneys, and hens gossip in the thatch shade. At noon, the green fills with market talk, apples shining on tables, cloth rolled into soft hills, a cooper tapping rings around a barrel that smells of oak. At dusk, the door latches lift and fall, and the sleep candles are pinched one by one, and the hum of the water rises, gentle as breath. The old say that if you listen kindly, if you listen like a patient friend, you can hear not one hum, but many past harvests, the crackle of frost on last winter's ruts, the names of those who were loved and those who were remembered, on a spring night when the meadows were plush with lambs' first steps and the orchard's blossoms were loose as confetti. The river carried something very small toward Lomere. It was not a leaf or a twig. It was not a boat, though a candle burned upon it. It was a lantern, no larger than a miller's cup, with delicate panes like dragonfly wings, and a handle no bigger than a loop of grass. It glided without haste. It glowed like the last pearl of twilight. The lantern came to rest where the bank sloped easy by, the willow that drinks with many mouths, and there it waited, as if it had simply come home. Chapter 1. A quiet errand. Edda Finch, apprentice to the village candle-keeper, rose before the roosters in an old habit she had never outgrown. She liked the hour when the world has not yet made up its mind. It was then the scents were most themselves, the dews, leaf brightness, the linen's plain truth, the wax's honey-warm whisper. She dressed by the window and took her satchel with the beeswax pucks and the good linen wicks rolled like tiny flags. Mistress Hobb, who kept the candle shop, had sent her out the evening before with a list of refills for the chapel, the mill house, the inn, and the watch hut at the north stile. Gentle steps, soft voice, Mistress Hobb had said, fastening a cloak about Edda's shoulders that smelt faintly of rosemary and stored winter. It is lambing week, and folk are tired and hopeful. Trim their lamps and leave them glad. A tidy wick is a kind of blessing. Edda liked blessings she could hold. She liked the way a candle's flame steadied after she trimmed its spent curl. She liked to see a room brighten and the shoulders in that room lower, as if the light had lifted a weight. It was an unnoticed craft, and thus it suited her. Edda moved quietly, and when she spoke, it was like the river's low humming meant more to soothe than to persuade. She crossed the green while the sky was the color of washed linen and the moon was a faint smudge, as if someone had touched it with a thumb. The chapel door opened for her father. Muir left it on a latch for early candles, and she set about her work. She replaced the thick stubs at the altar with new tapers, pressed with the shop's seal, a small bee with a wreath of leaves. She scraped away the drips along the hymn board and rubbed the brass sconce until it held a watery sun at the mill house. Old Gurdon nodded from his stool, one eye still asleep. Edda trimmed the lamp that lived beside the grindstone, and because the air was a powder of flour, she coaxed the flame lower, a small, steady thing. At the inn, she did much the same, but with more lamps. Inns are made of corners that do not love. The dark. She added an extra to the stair, thinking of boots at midnight and the careful way a tired foot tests a riser. By the time she reached the north stile, the world had chosen day, though in a soft and dew-friendly voice. The watch hut was empty, last year's barley straw still in a drift under the bench. Edda fitted a new candle in the tin cup, set the old stub aside in a bag for remelting, and lit the new wick. It caught and peered out through the open window, toward the path where traders would soon shuffle in with bells on their harness. She might have gone straight back then, with the day barely born and most of her errand done. But Edda had a habit to keep, and good habits, Mistress Hobbs said, were ropes you drop down into the well of yourself. They let you climb out when worries make the walls too steep. Edda's good habit was simply this: after lighting the watch hut candle, she always walked to the willow to listen to the river hum. Thus she went, her boots wet along the toes, her satchel lighter, her breath making small white feathers. The willow bowed to greet her. The river hummed, low and unhurried, like a mother's hand rubbing a child's back. Edda sat on the root bench, where countless backs had found their curve, and she let the hum fill in the thin places daylight sometimes leaves behind. It was then she saw the glimmer, cupped in a notch of water at the bank. Not a fish's scale, not the morning star, a lantern, tiny and patient, as if it had been waiting for her to look down. She went to it at once, the way one goes to a foundling or a fallen fledgling. Her hands were quick but careful. When she lifted the lantern, it was warm, and yet the glass did not scorch her palm. The panes were like mica, transparent yet openly, and where the lead would be in a window, there was only light, thin and silvery, as if it carried itself within itself. The handle seemed braided from nothing more substantial than breath held in a loop. Edda laughed softly, not out of mockery but delight. The lantern's flame did not flicker in the breeze. It did not smoke. It simply shone, and in its shine there was quiet. "Where have you come from?" she asked, because she was in the habit of asking objects kind questions. It is surprising how much a thing will tell you if you do not demand. The lantern answered in its fashion by not going out when she tilted it, by growing minutely more bright when her fingers found the supposed seam where a lid should be. There was no seam. All of it was one piece, yet it held a flame like a secret bird in a cage with no door. When Edda carried it back through the village, she held it under her cloak, not to hide it, but to keep it private. She did not know yet what it was. She knew only that it was not like the other lit things in Lomir, and strangers should be given gentle rooms to find their footing. "Mistress," Hob lifted her brows when Edda set the lantern on the counter between the wax pots. "What curious light," she said, leaning in without fear. "It has no smell, it has no ash. It is like the moon decided to be useful." Edda told her where she had found it, and how it had felt to touch. Mistress Hob listened with the same attention she gave to a new batch of wax. Nose near, eyes soft, all the senses employed. "We shall keep it by the window," she decided. "At last, for it seems a polite flame, and polite flames bring custom." They did not inventory the lantern, for how could they? They did not name it, for names come of knowing a thing's nature, and this one's nature was as yet unstated. They simply lived with it, the way Lomir lives with the river's hum comfortably, daily, without fuss. Chapter 2: The Candlekeeper's Rule. Word of a not quite ordinary light tends to travel the way soup's scent travels from a kitchen, down lanes, through fences, around corners, and finally into the places where news is enjoyed. Lomere does not do gossip with claws, but it does enjoy a story it can hold in hand. By market day, the lantern had acquired a few embellishments. Someone swore it had been found cradled in the paws of a sleeping otter. Another said it had drifted down from the stars as soft as thistledown. Edda shrugged and smiled and went on, trimming wicks. Mistress Hob, however, made a new rule, and because all her rules were for kindness' sake, no one minded the extra ink on the shop chalk. She wrote, "Rule, mind the modest lights. They may be carrying messages." When Edda asked, Mistress Hob nodded toward the lantern. "There are flames that burn to be seen," she said, "and there are flames that burn to see. This seems the second sort. Let it look at us in peace." So they did. The lantern sat at the window with a view of the green, where a spindle seller from Upbridge spun stories as easily as wool, where children hopped the cobbles as if they were stepping stones across imagined lakes, where the village dog, a considerate mastiff called Mere, made rounds like a constable, accepting compliments as taxes. The lantern watched it all with mild attention, as if memorizing Lomere the way one memorizes a lullaby, so the tune will be at hand at the lonely hour at night. The lantern's ray was little and low, like a cat asleep. Edda found that if she set a plain candle beside it, the candle's flame took up the lantern's calm. No sputter, no smoke, no troublesome leaning in draughts. Even the in-lamps burned gentler after an hour's rest near the tiny light. Mistress Hob called it tempering. "We temper steel with heat and patience," she said. "Why not flame with light and patience? You have found a tutor, dear Edda." Edda flushed at that. She liked to be useful, not praised, but she watched more closely. She noticed how the lantern brightened when someone spoke kindly, and dimmed by a hair when someone spoke in a voice the village did not deserve. She noticed how it glowed a fraction warmer when the river hummed loud, as it did on nights of rain, and how its brightness steadied most when she leaned on the sill with her cheek on her hand and told it what she had done that day. "Trimmed 10 wicks at the Abbey," she would say. "Found that the southern sconce prefers a shorter curl. Old Gurdon says his millstone has a song of its own, but it is not in a mood to sing." The lantern seemed to approve of small, true things. On the 7th day after Edda found it, 2 travellers came from the East Road, a minstrel with a harp case patched like a quilt and a knight, who did not quite want to be seen as such. The minstrel's name was Arlen. He proclaimed it with a bow that made the bells on his boots laugh. The knight did not proclaim anything at all. He wore a cloak the colour of stormwater and gloves with no crest. Yet his boots spoke nobility. They did not brag, but they had been cobbled by hands that had measured Duke's feet. Lights trimmed. Arlen asked cheerfully, peering around the shop as if his eyes were candles that required mending. "Always," said Mistress Hob, "and tuned besides." "Tuned," Arlen repeated, delighted. "A new word for me. I have tuned strings, and sometimes stories, but never fires. How much to tune a hearth?" "Kind speech, and a clean grate," Mistress Hob said, "and a loaf, if you wish the warmth to last." The knight glanced toward the window and the little lantern sitting as if in thought. His eyes did that thing keen eyes do when they recognize more in a quiet corner than most. He stepped closer, and the lantern brightened by a hair. This Arlen drew in with a breath like a question. "Moon in a cup." "Lantern from the river," Edda said, and the words felt right the moment she said them. Perhaps because they did not claim more than was known. The minstrel lifted both palms. "Ah, the river that hums," I've heard of it. A troop at Westford sang a verse where Lomia lies, and Lomia hears. The water keeps old winter's tears. Close, said Edda, with the polite precision of one correcting a tune she loves. But our water keeps old winter's secrets. Tears are too sharp for a hum. Arlen laughed softly, well taught. May I play here tonight? A little song, a little quiet. I'll tune the strings to match your flames. Mistress Hob made space. On the wide sill where folks sometimes sat with their tea, the minstrel unpacked his harp. The knight stood in the doorway, neither entering nor leaving, a man not yet decided. The first notes found the rafters as gently as moths. People in the lane slowed their steps without meaning to. Edda, polishing a brass tray because it wanted to shine, felt the lantern's glow lean toward the harp as a sunflower leans. Outside, the river hummed. Inside, the harp answered. There are conversations no words can manage, and this was one of them. String to water, water to light, light to faces, faces to breath. Edda noticed the knight's shoulders lower, which is what happens when something quietly persuades you that the world will manage without your watchfulness for a little while. He took off one glove. His hand was scarred in the way an honest blade teaches. When the last note had subsided past hearing and become something you only remembered, people left coins and bread and thanks. The minstrel nodded as if he had borrowed all these things, and meant to return them with interest. The knight said nothing, but before they went to the inn, he turned back to the lantern and inclined his head, the way one greets a host whose house you have not yet entered. Chapter 3: The Gentle Quest begins. Lomia does not send people on quests the way some kingdoms do. It is not a village of decrees or trumpets or tapestries that announce an adventure with a golden thread. Lomia sends people the way a field, sends seeds on the wind, quietly, with a last soft farewell and the hope of return. Edda did not wake knowing she would be set on a path, but some mornings the river hum includes a note you cannot ignore, a tone like a finger tapping the inside of your heart. It began with a visit from Father Muir. He entered the candle shop, wearing worry folded neatly under his good humor, the way a letter is tucked into a book. "I've come to ask a favor of your flame," he said, nodding toward the little lantern. "The Abbey's reliquary candles sputter every dusk this week, and I have tried all I know. I suspect there is a draught where there ought not to be one, but the sisters are concerned. The book of ours opens tonight to the litanies of mending, and it is best read with light that behaves." Mistress Hob looked to Edda, and Edda nodded. "I'll come," she said, taking her satchel. She looked at the lantern, which answered, by brightening hardly at all, as if to say that dignities need not be made of spectacle. The abbey sat a mile beyond the willow, its stone warm with sun even in winter, its gardens square and neat and peaceful as a well-swept mind. The reliquary was small, a room the size of a big closet, lit by 2 long candles and a window stained with a round of blue glass. The air in the reliquary was steady, no draughts, no murmuring chill, yet the candles misbehaved like toddlers after too much sugar. They popped and spat and leaned like drunks. Edda trimmed and coaxed and set her little glass windshields before the wicks. The flames obliged for a few heartbeats, then returned to their skipping dot. She brought the lantern from her satchel and set it between the 2 long candles. Just for a moment, she said to Father Muir, who trusted her enough to nod. The reliquary felt the lantern's presence, the way a room feels, a window opening onto honest air. Edda watched a minute, and then 2, The long flames lifted their shoulders and settled. It was not much, but it was enough. The river's gift is a good one, Father Muir whispered. He did not ask what it was exactly. He blessed the reliquary for its patience and the candles for their cooperation. And then he stepped aside as footsteps sounded in the corridor. The abbess came in, a woman like a tall oak in winter, spare of leaf but rich in ring. She stood a long moment with her hands folded, not in fervor but in comprehension, as though she could read the lantern as one reads a page in a familiar book. "This light knows its work," she said at last. "May I borrow it for the night?" Edda looked to Father Muir and then inward, where her good rope of habit waited, and then outward, where the lantern glowed without heat. "Yes," she said, "I think it wants to listen to your litanies." That night, the litanies of mending sounded like rain falling where it is most needed. The sisters read slowly, savoring the syllables as if they were herbs steeped to tea. The lantern made a small circle of glad quiet in which the words could do their work. When dawn came, the abbess returned the light to Edda with thanks, and asked only, in that oakwise way, "Has the river given you a name for it yet?" "No," Edda said, "but it feels like a lantern that remembers, a lantern of oak-keeping." "Then keep it," said the abbess. "But know this, there is a silence west of Lomir that is not like other silences. It sits in the old forest beyond the gatehouse hill. Travellers speak of a hush there, heavy and undeciding, as if a room full of people waited for someone to say the first word and no one would. If a lantern keeps, perhaps it might keep that hush from growing. Perhaps it might carry a word into a room that has forgotten its first." Edda swallowed. The idea of going into a silence that had become a thing did not frighten her exactly, but it felt like stepping into water that hides its depth, alone. She asked, not to be brave or to ask for a retinue, but to be clear. "Not if you prefer." "Otherwise," said the abbess, and Edda felt the truth of it, "journeys do not refuse companions. They welcome whoever is ready to walk and listen." When Edda returned to the village, the minstrel and the knight were in the green, the first entertaining children with a harmless trick in which a coin turned into a clover, the second pretending not to notice that kindness happens even without a sword. Edda told them what the abbess had said. Arlen's eyes sparkled the way a person's do when adventure is the rhyme they were waiting to hear. The knight's face did not change much, but it changed enough. "We can walk with you," Arlen said. "I've songs that have spoken into silences and come back with a sigh for a friend." The knight nodded. "I have nothing more pressing than not being where I was," he said, "which is a kind of truth some men must live for a time. My name is Rowan." He said it as if tossing a pebble into a hedge, gently, not wanting anyone to shout about it. "Edda," she said, "of the candle shop." "Arlen," said the minstrel, as if a name were a note and he had tuned it. They agreed to set out at dawn, which is when a village can most afford to let a person go. Mistress Hobb packed Edda's satchel with wax and wicks, salve for chafes, a skein of stout twine, and 2 oatcakes wrapped in a clean napkin. "For courage that needs chewing," she said, kissing Edda's hair in a way that smoothed more. "Then strands. Remember the rule. Mind modest lights. They carry messages. And if the forest has forgotten its first word, take one with you. Welcome is usually best." Chapter 4. The Gatehouse Hill and the Thread of Sound. The 3 left Lomir by the east first, to walk the long curve to the west gatehouse along the riverbank. For Arlen insisted that beginnings should be made where the humming could be heard. "If the river keeps the tune," he said, let us keep in key. They walked the way patient people walk, not too fast, not too slow, and always making room for what the world offers. The heron lifted itself up with the calm of an old scholar rising to fetch a book. An otter turned on its back to regard them, paws folded like a villager listening to a sermon he has heard before but loves anyway. The lantern rode in Edda's hands, its glow tarrying a little on the undersides of willow leaves, as if it were giving them compliments too modest to say aloud. Rowan did not talk much. When he did, it was to point out useful things without making a fuss of his usefulness. Step there, he would say when the path looked even but wasn't. That shrub breaks wind without breaking itself. A good shelter if clouds turn peevish. Arlen talked plenty, but the way a brook talks, with small laughs and lucid pauses. He told a story about a baker who learned to make meringue during a snowstorm because he had eggs, sugar, and time, and no other choices. And in the telling he made the snow gentle and the baker patient and the meringue a little cloud that chose to land on a tart dot. By noon they reached the gatehouse hill, where a squat stone arch watched the road west with the mild suspicion of an old cat. Beyond it, the path entered the forest that ran like a deep green seam up the side of the county. Edda felt the air change the instant they passed under the arch. It was cooler, and not with the ordinary cool of shade. It had the cool of a held breath. The birdsong thinned as if it had walked a dozen steps ahead and then waited. Polite but unsure, Arlen stopped and drew one string on the harp with his thumb. The note went out strongly and came back smaller, as if it had met a room where echoes were discouraged. Rowan lifted his head the way a hound might listening for distance with bones, not ears. Edda held the lantern forward. It did not brighten, but it steadied in the way one steadies when one means to be firm without being rude. What is silence? Arlen mused, very softly, as if afraid he might step on the answer. It isn't the absence of sound, that's just quiet. Silence is, perhaps, a place that forgot its neighbors. Rowan stooped and touched 2 fingers to the packed earth. Or a place that forgot its first visitor and never stopped waiting. Edda thought of the abbess's words. She thought of the shop rule. Mind the modest lights. They may be carrying messages. She lifted the lantern to chin height and spoke the word Mistress Hobb had sent, welcome. The word went into the trees and did not entirely vanish. It slowed, as if caught on fine threads, and then continued, less sure of itself. The lantern's glow hummed a fraction, not a sound of ears, but of wrists and ribs. The river's hum had been gentle like breath. This was quiet like patience, not resistance. Not exactly. They walked. The path through the westwood curved as if it were remembering an older way and trying to match it. Ferns brushed their calves like friendly cats. Here and there, small mushrooms shrugged up out of last year's leaves, wearing caps the color of afternoon tea. The hush did not deepen, but it did not lift. It was like walking through a room where someone sleeps behind a screen and you wish not to wake them. After an hour, Arlen stopped again. We should leave a thread, he said. Not because we'll be lost, but because we may be tired, and tired people love a kindly sign. Edda had twine, she always did. Rowan cut it in 2 lengths with the quietest of knives. They tied small knots at intervals where 2 branches crossed. Nothing that would choke a tree or snag a deer. Just a little sign that said, we were here and you are not alone. Edda hung small curls of wick toothin as a promise-wearer branch. Already fell in a circle, so the forest would not feel improved upon. The lantern approved this. She felt it in her hand, the way one feels a cat's purr in the wrist, through bone more than skin. By late afternoon they came to a clearing as round as the inside of a great bell. It would have been a joyous place if not for the hush, which was heavier here, like a blanket laid over a bright child too early in the day. In the middle of the clearing stood a stone, waist high, with a shallow bowl on top, as if set to catch rain for birds that had forgotten their thirst. Rowan frowned in concentration. "This is a word place," he said at last, surprising himself with the sentence, "where a word was once put and expected to grow." Arlen nodded, running his fingers along the stone the way a traveller reads a milestone for the ghost of letters. "I know of such things. In the Old North they have speaking bowls at crossroads. Those are 4 oaths. But this feels older and kinder." Edda stepped forward and held the lantern above the bowl. The hush leaned in, curious but shy. She could almost feel it, like a room full of people lifting their faces, waiting to see if the singer would begin. The lantern glowed with a warmth like late honey. Edda did not look to the men for counsel. She did not ask the forest what it wanted. She simply did the work she knew. She trimmed. She spoke softly to the hush, as she might speak to a wick that will not take flame until you tell it what it is good for. "We are travellers," she said. "We have come to mind the modest light that lives in this place. If there is a message here, we will carry it. If there has been a waiting, we will sit with it." She set the lantern gently into the bowl. It fit as if the bowl had been shaped. By the idea of it, the glow did not leap, it settled. Arlen drew a chord. Rowan set his palm on the stone, as if lending his steadiness, and the hush changed not into noise, not into talk, but into a stillness that had room in it, from somewhere under the stone or over it, or in the bowl or in the lantern, for who can say where a whisper lives? There came a thread of sound, like the first line of a hymn sung by someone who knows the rest will follow. It was very small. It was very simple. The word within it was the same Edda had spoken at the gate. "Welcome." Arlen answered it with the same word on a note, and Rowan's breath made a second. Edda did the only thing she knows best. She watched the flame and let it be untroubled. The thread of sound climbed a handspan and then another, fragile as new ice but holding. The clearing seemed to exhale. A bird in the far tree remembered a call and tried it awkwardly, the way a boy's voice cracks and then settles into what it will be. The hush altered again, turning from pressed wool to a shawl that could be lifted and put around shoulders. They waited until dusk, when Edda lifted the lantern from the bowl. A faint glow remained in the stone a moment, then sank in like water into dry soil. The path back to the gatehouse felt shorter, not because their feet were faster, but because the world had become slightly more itself at the edge of the wood. The 3 turned and inclined their heads toward the trees. Thanks is better spoken than assumed. The lantern flickered as close to a flicker as it ever came, as if it had found a kinship. The river's hum greeted them as they walked along the bank toward Lomere, and for a few steps it seemed to Edda that the hum had acquired a grace note, quiet but there, like a friend joining a chorus and not minding which part she sang. Chapter 5. The Old Inn by the Road. The Old Inn by the Road was called the Wayfarer's Cup, though few used its formal name. Most called it the Cup as if it were a friend's house, which in a way it was, for its hearth kept a memory of every rain-soaked cloak and every story ever wrung out to dry. When Edda, Arlen and Rowan came in at dusk, The inn smelled of barley stew and thyme, of lamp oil politely trimmed, of oak logs burning with the confidence of old furniture invited at last to be fire. The innkeep, Mathilde Thatch, had a crown of grey hair that frizzed like thistledown, and a laugh that started in her eyes and only later reached her mouth. She nodded at the newcomers, as if picking them from a shelf where she kept her favourite people. Seats for those who look like they've listened to trees, she said, guiding them to a table by the corner post where a notch told of a love pledge carved long ago. Eat, and then say whether you aim for the castle by the river, the orchard road, or the far hill with the sheep that eat poets' hats. Arlen brightened. Do they? A dangerous flock. They do, said Mathilde. They used to eat the poems, but that proved indigestible. Hats go down easier. Edda set the lantern upon the table and noticed how the hearth's temper smoothed itself in the lantern's company, the flames settling into even shoulders like choir boys at last confident of their part. She did not mean to be noticed, but the old woman's gaze skipped from the lantern to Edda's hands and then back again. That's a well-mannered light, said Mathilde, and to the lantern as one speaks to a cat. Welcome, dearie. The lantern kissed the oak with a small oval of light. Bowls arrived, and brown bread with butter the colour of soft brass. Rowan ate with the tidy hunger of a soldier who remembers rations and prefers gratitude to greed. Arlen paused between spoonfuls to polish a story, holding it up to the firelight to see if the edges shone. Edda ate and listened, her thoughts returning to the stone bowl in the hushwood, to the word that had become a thread, to the way small steadinesses could tilt a room toward peace. After supper, travellers who favoured quiet gathered near the corner. Post, drawn as much by the lantern's calm as by Arlen's harp. Mathilde fetched a chair that did not wobble, and Rowan leaned his back to the post with the contentment of someone whose shoulders had been a wall for too long and were now given a kinder task, simply to be near. Arlen tuned softly, drawing the room's attention into a gentle knot. Not a ballad, he said to them all, but a stroll. He began with a melody that walked the hearthrug pattern, a step of ivy, a step of flower, a step of brick. The tune wore comfortable shoes. It visited the mantel, greeted the pewter plates, shook hands with the curtain rod, and bowed to the kettle. When it found the lantern, it made a circle around it, as one might circle a friend you have not seen in a while to see what the years have done. The lantern shone without taking offence. Mathilde wiped a glass dry and listened sideways. When the last notes had arranged themselves along the rafters like small lanterns after a holiday, she tapped the counter. For your troubles, she said, laying out a slice of spice cake and 3 walnuts. Not troubles, Arlen said. Privileges. He broke the walnuts with his palm and shared the meats 3 ways. Rowan smiled with one corner of his mouth, which for him was like throwing his hat in the air. Later, when chairs nudged back and boots scuffed the plank floor in that comfortable way that means beds will soon be found, Mathilde came to the table and set down a pot of hot water and a sprig of lemon balm. For sleeping, she said to Edda, and for what you carry. Edda glanced at the lantern. We carry what we can keep. Sometimes, Mathilde said, eyes kind and shrewd as a cat's, we keep what we can carry. You heading to the castle by the river. The Baron keeps a library of old chorals. Good words live there, though some have dust on their vowels. The steward, Master Clare, will let you read if you behave like a book yourselves. We mean to, Edda said. The abbess spoke of a silence that forgot its first word. We found where it might remember. Perhaps the castle keeps the next. Mathilde patted Edda's hand as one pats bread to to test for doneness. Castles keep many things. Some they do not mean to. She leaned in and lowered her voice to the level that belongs to confidences and kettles. There's a hearth secret in those walls, or so the masons whisper. The old fire pit under the main hall brick over long ago keeps a tale it won't tell to smoke. If you listen with your lantern, you might hear it tell to light. Why bricked? Rowan asked. Flood once, chimney twice. A lord who sneezed at embers and preferred tapestries. Reasons pile up like plates, Mathilde said. You'll see, sleep now. Dreams sharpen ears. They slept in rooms that held the echoes of 100 safeties, mothers soothing fevers, friends sharing last coins, poets inventing hats for sheep. Edda set the lantern on the windowsill. The moon slid a thumb of silver under the curtain and went on. Chapter 6. The Castle by the River. Morning came in a braid of cloud and sun. The way to the river castle followed low meadows where dew beads clung to grass like notes on a stave. The castle itself rose slow from the bank, not forbidding, merely settled, as if the river had once brought stones and set them as a child sets pretties in a row. They crossed the bridge and spoke politely to the porter, who looked them over with the grave courtesy of a man who knows doors matter. Arlen named himself a minstrel, which doors often like. Rowan named himself only Rowan, which was also acceptable. Edda gave the porter a pinch of beeswax from her pocket for his lantern. A pinch for a steady hand, she said. He smiled then, and sent them in with a nod that meant, I will remember your face among the kind ones. The great hall smelled of rushes and clean wool and old smoke that had become a perfume, rather than a nuisance, like a story that no longer boasts. Tapestries hung with the patience of winter fields. On a dais, a chair waited not, a throne, but a seat with arms that had learned the shape of elbows. They did not seek the Baron. They sought Master Clare, who oversaw the library and the cellars and the slow repairs that keep a place both upright and honourable. They found him in a side chamber walking his fingers across a ledger as if it were a keyboard to a song only he could hear. He was thin as a stave and kept his hair in a queue because his thoughts moved better when his hair did not. He greeted them with a lift of the head that said he valued attention, which made him a brother to Edda. We ask the favour of an hour with your books of songs, Arlen said. We hunt no scandal, only a word. Master Clare blinked once, considering the request as one considers a chair before offering it. Words are the stonework of the air, he said. We have a store of stone, though some has crumbled. You may look. Return each volume to its place. Leave no candle unwatched, and no page unturned with wet hands. He paused, eyes slipping to the lantern leaning patiently in Edda's hands. That's an odd flame. Odd, but polite, Edda said. Polite will do, Clare replied, and led them to the library, a room like a small forest of shelves, with windows that had never forgotten the river's way with light. They started with the chorals. The bindings murmured when opened, the notes holding the smell of oak galls and old resin. Arlen hummed them as he read, choosing slow wands hymns that took their time to land, like swans on gentle water. Edda watched the lantern at certain phrases. Abide a while, thou wandering breath, and take up thy rest in patient flame. The light deepened as a chast deepens with a sigh. Rowan turned pages without haste. He traced initials that sprouted leaves, ran his thumb along a margin where an old hand had written "Sing softer here." It pleased him that someone had cared enough to counsel a voice with pencil. By noon, A thread had emerged. Old songs spoke of the first word, as if it were a seed certain places kept safe. Wells, hearths, bridges, thresholds, to kindle a fire, one might first speak home. To cross a bridge, peace. To enter a home, welcome. The seed word was not a spell. It was a courtesy that returned to a place what it had once given. Some verses mentioned still bells, others speaking bowls, still others listening stones. Edda copied lines into a leaf of paper with a practiced hand that made no fetish of flourishes. Still bells, she said, tapping the phrase. If a hush can become a shawl, a bell can become a bowl. The forest bowl may be kin to a bell that forgot to ring and learned to listen instead. Master Clare returned then, having given them space, and, perhaps, watched from the door between tasks the way a kindly cat watches a mouse that has decided not to steal. Find a word worth carrying, he asked. A path of them, Arlen said. We mean to step where it leads. Clare nodded, as if confirming that the river was still the river. Before you go, he said, walk with me. There's a place under the hall where the house keeps a cough. He led them through corridors, smoothed by generations of boots, down a stair whose stones sighed when feet found them, and into a low chamber under the dais. The air smelled not of mould but of old sleep, which is a kinder smell. In the centre was a circle of brick newer than its neighbours set, where a fire pit would once have been. Ash lingered at the edges, not quite swept. The old hearth, Clare said, bricked to keep smoke from sulking under rafters it had come to dislike. But every winter when the first frost takes the window latches, this circle weeps soot. Not much, just a polite cough. The masons call it a complaint. I call it a memory. The house misses something, perhaps a word. Edda set the lantern on the bricks. The glow reached down as water reaches into a well slowly, finding stones that had forgotten warmth. Rowan stood in the shadow beside the stairs, listening with his shoulders. Arlen placed his palm flat to the circle as if smoothing a ruffled sleeve. What was the hearth's first word? Edda asked, not of Clare, who could not know, but of the place. She spoke quietly, as she would to a candle. A long moment passed. Then the lantern lent the answer. Not a sound, precisely, but a weight that formed itself in the shape of a syllable. Home, Arlen sang it only the one word, on a tone that felt like a well-rope lowered hand over hand. Edda cupped the lantern in both palms. Rowan took off his glove and spread his fingers to the brick. Master Clare closed his ledger of a face and let it be a room instead. Something in the bricked circle relaxed. If a house can unclench, this one did. The smell in the chamber changed slightly, as if a cupboard had been opened on a winter afternoon, and the fragrance of saved apples stepped out. A spider that had built between two stones quietly cut its anchor line and walked away. Not alarmed, merely reminded of somewhere else to be. Clare exhaled. I will not unbrick it, he said. Smoke would sulk again. But I will remember to say the word when frost comes. Houses like to be reminded of their name. They returned to the hall. The Baron passed through and nodded to Clare, who nodded back in a language of eyebrows that meant the important things had not fallen down. The three travellers made their farewells. At the outer door, Master Clare slipped Edda a small brass key on a ribbon. For the grove, he said. The grove, Edda asked. Of still bells, Clare replied. Northwest of the castle, where the river folds back on itself, as if rereading a favourite line. The old map marks it. The key opens the iron gate the last steward had forged when a bull decided. The bells were enemies. It's a kindness to let only listeners in. Edda tucked the key safe. "Thank you," she said, and meant not only the key, but the trust that comes with any object that might open or close. Chapter 7. The Grove of Still Bells. Afternoon light dappled the path northwest of the castle, leaves dropping coins of sun into their hair. They walked without hurry. The lantern's glow preferred the green shade, flattering moss and lichen alike. When they reached the bend where the river paused to watch its reflection and approve, they found the gate, iron in a pattern of vines, quiet with the kind of rust that has made peace with time. The lock admitted the key with a sigh you might hear from a stool. Asked to carry a child again. Inside, a grove of bell frames standing among trees like old shepherds. The bells themselves were not hung. They were seated on low stone plinths, mouths up like bowls that had finished being bells and decided to listen forever. Some were small as hats, others wide as bathing tubs. Each was greened with a bloom of age. Each held a drift of leaves and a sliver of sky. Arlen stopped on the threshold and removed his boots without thinking. Rowan bowed his head. Edda placed the lantern on the nearest plinth, and its light looked into the bell the way one looks into a sleeping face. There was no hush here, not like the forest's shawl of absence. There was a stillness, which is different to comfort that does not refuse sound, but gives it a place to rest when it arrives. Birds hopped, leaves spoke quietly, the river murmured through the gate bars. The bells waited. Arlen sat cross-legged and set the harp across his knees. He did not pluck at once. He matched his breath to the rhythm of the leaves, the on-off of dapple. Rowan walked the perimeter, attentive to broken fence rails and rabbit paths and places where wind made small doorways. Edda moved among the bells, with a cloth from her satchel, wiping away the thinnest veils of leaf dust, as one wakes a friend with a touch to the hairline on the largest bell. Near the rim, a line of script had come soft with tarnish. Edda breathed on it and rubbed gently. Letters returned like footprints revealed when snow remembers what lies beneath. She read aloud, slow, begin kindly. Arlen looked up, smiling as if a joke had landed and found no need to boast. All music wants that. They found other lines on other bells. Speak as if the place could answer. Leave when your welcome is finished, not when it is gone. A bell rings to gather what is scattered. A bowl listens to gather what is unspoken. Edda copied the phrases into her leaf. The lantern's glow deepened as each sentence settled, like tea leaves finding their lower destiny. At last Arlen played. Not a melody, at first just single notes spaced the way seeds are spaced by a careful hand. Each tone fell into a bell and made a sound that was not an echo, but a companion, a low hum, a silver whisper, a soft-lidded answer. Rowan leaned his shoulder to a young oak and closed his eyes to listen the way. One listens when there is nothing to guard against and everything to welcome. Edda placed the lantern at the center of the grove on a flat stone whose circle seemed meant for it, and stood with palms open, as if catching rain. As the notes went out, the bells gathered them and returned them, fitting them among the leaves. The river, the faded iron, the moss, the worn inscriptions, and the three listening bodies. The grove became a choir in which no one voice was obliged to be loud. The lantern brightened, but not skyward. It brightened downward, as if sending its light through the stone into the earth, where roots carry news between trees like a postman who loves every house. When Arlen ceased, the silence that followed was not empty. It was full of what had been. Shared Edda spoke, not to break it, but to place inside it one more word. We seek the first words of places that have forgotten. We found welcome in the westward, and home beneath the hall. What word belongs here? She was not surprised when the answer came not from the lantern, but from the bells. A breath crossed the grove that was more intention than wind, and the rims of the bowls voiced it like a remembered prayer. Listen. Rowan's mouth moved around the word as if tasting its edges. Arlen answered with a single pluck, and the bells hummed back, satisfied as old tools put again to work. They remained until the light through leaves thinned toward evening. Before they left, Edda went bell to bell and whispered thanks. She plucked from one a small oak leaf in the shape of a heart and tucked it into her book between begin kindly and listen. At the gate, the key turned again with its small stool sigh, and the iron vines resumed their watch. Back on the river path, Arlen said 3 words: welcome, home, listen. They make a hearth if you add bread and time. Time we can carry. Rowan said, bread we can buy, and words we can keep if we mind them. The abbess hoped the hush would loosen if a first word were offered, Edda said. It did. Perhaps other places carry other kinds of forgetting. We might go where forgetting has become habit and offer a word like a warm cup. Rowan looked west, where hills held the day's last sips of sun. There is a hamlet near the downs, he said slowly, where lamplight never lasts. They say wicks drown and wood sulks, and children do not sleep easily. I passed there once as a messenger and left quickly, because messages dislike getting wet. His mouth tugged at the idea of a smile. It may be that the place has misplaced its hearth. The hearth secret Mathilde spoke of, said Edda. Not under a hole this time, but under a roof that doesn't yet remember what roofs are for. We'll go in the morning, Arlen said, shouldering the harp. Tonight, I'll sing the river a thanks and borrow a bed from the inn whose mattresses know how to hold a dream without dropping it. Chapter 8. The Hearth's Secret. They set out at dawn, carrying pockets of the groves, listening in their ears, and the castles homeward in their bones. The path to the downs rose gently, threading between hedges where the blackbirds scolded. Foxes for thinking themselves inevitable. The hamlet came into view as a cluster of roofs gathered like a family under a shawl too small for the cold. Smoke pinched itself thin from eaves. Doors opened and closed quickly, as if warmth were a shy animal that might escape if looked at too long. At the far end stood a cottage sagging toward the ditch with the bravery of a tired dancer. A woman with hands reddened by water lifted a bucket from a well and held it as if it might accuse her. When the travellers approached, she set it down with relief and wiped her palms on her apron, which was clean in the way an apron is clean between labours. Good day, she said, managing civility despite the effort it cost to keep her face steady. If you're selling news, we can pay a cup of broth. If you're buying sorrow, we have too much stock. We've come to listen, Edda said, and it was the right word. The woman's shoulders lowered a fraction. I am Annette, she said. This is Talendown, where fires forget to be fires. I can make a blaze, but it loses faith. The baby sleeps only when my bones cannot. Lamps take the sulks. The wind finds ways in even when I mend the thatch with my best mending. We are not cursed, for we do not deserve curses. We are not blessed, but we would know how to begin. Begin kindly, Arlen murmured, mostly to himself, hearing the bell's counsel. May we see your hearth? Edda asked. Annette led them inside. The cottage smelled of soap, wool, stale smoke, and the kind of fatigue that has not yet turned to bitterness. The hearth was set with good stone and decent brick. The ashes were grey in the middle, but black around. The rim where wood had given up. Edda knelt with a practiced respect that made Annette's eyes soften. No one kneels to your hearth who wishes you ill. Rowan crouched at the door and watched the draught curl, paying attention to how the air moved, as one pays attention to a horse deciding which way to shy. Arlen tuned his harp to the room's odd pitch, a quarter turn melancholier than most. Edda set the lantern on the mantel and felt at once what the place did with light, not smothered it, not disdained, it simply forgot to keep it, as if mornings counted and evenings did not. She traced the brick over the lintel with her fingertip. Soot came off in a line like a sentence. She hummed, low, the way she might hum to a child, not hers. A hearth, she said quietly, is a circle that remembers, and a door that forgives. Annette leaned a hip to the table and covered her mouth. With 2 fingers, a gesture that keeps tears from falling by giving them company. If a door forgives, she said, voice strange in her own ears for saying hope-shaped words, ours has forgotten how. Edda looked to Rowan. The flu. True, he said, playing the old game of rhymes they had not yet invented. Between them he stood and ran his palm along the inside jamb, where hands over time leave polish. The house hasn't decided where to put its breath. Smoke asks to leave. The rafters ask it to stay. The air outside pretends it's busy. We can set a vent and widen the throat where it pinches. Annette fetched a basket of tools without being told. People who have worked for a living know where tools live. Rowan set to the masonry with a care that looked like slowness but wasn't. Arlen, at Edda's request, carried kindling to the yard and split it into lengths that had purely no opinion other than to cooperate. Edda trimmed Annette's to best candles and set them by the window to take the lantern's lesson, then returned the lantern to the mantel and listened. What did the hearth want? Not grandeur, not tapestries. Hearths want only company and a word to begin with. Edda found it without surprise. Home, she said, but not as they had said it under the hall. Here, she said it with a question mark curled in the sound, like a hook. Home. The lantern answered by warming the air near the mantel by a whisper. The baby in the cradle sighed, as if someone had finally remembered the end of a story. Rowan wiped his hands and nodded. Try, he said. Edda built the smallest of fires on laid brick. 2 splits, 1 twig, a wisp of straw, a patience of breath. She did not ask it to be mighty. She asked it to be itself. Here, home, she said again, and added the second word the bells had given them. Listen. Arlen played nothing at first. Then he found a line between smoke and song, a minute filament like dew between 2 grasses, and plucked only where the smoke wanted to arrow. The draught found itself. The flame stepped aboard its own small confidence and rose. The smoke went up because the air had been told a courteous truth. Doors forgive. Chimneys let go. Annette sank to a stool the way a winter coat hangs on a peg at last. Her palms turned open on her knees. I have 2 more rooms and a shed and the side gate and the wrong side of my husband's temper when it rains. Can a word teach more than one thing at a time? It can, Edda said, but it likes to be carried to each door in turn. They carried it. They opened shutters and found they wanted a little less opening and a little more hinge oil. Rowan planed a swollen sill so the latch would love its job again. Edda left a pinch of wax on each window rail for the candles of other days. Arlen sang while he worked, lyrics made on the spot from Annette's objects. Here's a bowl that held the pears. Here's the rug with faded squares, here's the coat that mends the rain, here's the nail that loves the pain. Home, it says, and listen, to doors know what they're asked to do. By afternoon, the cottage felt as if it had been borrowed by its rightful owners from a future day when everything fits. The baby slept with his mouth loose, which is a compliment. Babies give 2 rooms that have learned their names. Annette pressed coins on them and bread besides. They took the bread and left the coins, for some payments are better spent by being refused. At the door, Edda turned and pointed to the mantel. When you rise in the dark, she said, say home where the light should be, and listen where the smoke should go. The first word will make a place. The second will show it how. Annette nodded. Tears content now to fall with no need for fingers to chaperone them. And when the child is stubborn, begin kindly, Edda murmured, and the woman laughed at last, which is sometimes how a house knows the work is finished for the day. They walked on, a little lighter and a little full. The downs spread ahead, soft as pillows for giants. Behind them, a thin thread of smoke rose from Annette's chimney and did not change its mind. The lantern shone in Edda's hand with a satisfaction that did not boast. Rowan adjusted his pack so its straps rested where shoulders are pleased to be held. Arlen strummed a chord that made 3 blackbirds decide not to argue about a worm. They camped that night under a hawthorn that had taught itself to be generous to travellers, by leaning toward the path just enough to feel like a welcome. Rowan laid the fire as if it were an oath, simple, exact, ready to keep itself. Arlen roasted apples he had bought from a boy on the road, turning them with a stick until their skins went slack and sweet. Edda set the lantern on a stone and watched its light shine in the apple flesh, conjuring the orchard out of memory. Where next? Arlen asked the dark. The river, Rowan said, surprising himself with how certain the word felt. We have followed it as listeners. Perhaps it wants us to follow as students. There's a bend near Lomia where old timbers make a drift. In floods it gathers flotsam. In summers it makes an island small enough for a fox to believe itself a king. If ever there were a place to learn the river's first word, that might be it. The river hums us to sleep, Edda said, lowering the wick with a small trim to set the night's rhythm. Perhaps the river's first word is also its last, but we won't know until we ask. They lay down with the ordinary luxuries of the road, a log where a head becomes brave, a cloak where a knee remembers warmth, the sound of a brook telling stories to stones that never interrupt. Edda watched the lantern's glow soften and steady beside the fire, 2 lights conversing, without jealousy. She thought of Lomir, of Mistress Hobb and the shop's new rule, of Father Muir's reliquary, of the abbess and her oak-ring wisdom, of Matilde at the cup, of Master Clare and his ledger fingers, of Annette's baby sleep. She thought of the grove of bells keeping what the world says and what it means. Welcome, home, listen, she whispered, and the hawthorn answered with the creak of a branch remembering its own cradle days in the wind. The river, not far off, hummed to the stars as if tuning them one by one. The lantern watched with that mild attention that had become their compass. Sleep came, and in sleep a dream. Edda stood at the willow by Lomia and held the lantern toward the water. Fish rose, not to feed but to hear. The moon set its silver. Lip to the current the way old stories say it once did. And from beneath the humming came a word that was not a word yet, as a bud is not a rose yet, but is entirely itself. She woke without the sound on her tongue, but with the certainty that morning would carry them nearer.